Calling to order the zoning bylaw committee meeting for October 26th. Roll call alphabetical. Tom Callahan is here.
Jack here.
Dave.
David Farag is here.
Cassie.
Cassie Malatesta is here.
Okay, I'm sure Clark will join us. And also with us is Cassandra Thayer, our assistant town planner. You can, I'm just going to ask you to share your screen in a little bit, so don't, other than that. All right, wait a minute, I got an email here. I'm wondering who it is. No, it's just, I think it's just a meeting reminder. All right, anyway, there will be a little change in our agenda tonight, but we'll get right into it. The first thing is to go over the first public forum, and I don't want to focus on how it was conducted and the format. You know, we can talk. What's done is done in that respect. I'd like to focus on what we got out of it as messages from the people in the community. We know we need a speaker the next time. You know, the planning board gave us enough critiques the other night for my benefit. And I'm not going to be a featured speaker at either of the next two forums if that bothers people. So,
Wait,
so
was there feedback, Tom, that someone's better in place of you, or?
Never mind. I don't want to get into it. But I don't, you know, what's done is done. We did what we did. We learned some things. We are going to talk about the next forum. So if there's some format changes that anybody has an idea, we can talk about it when we get to the next forum. So I just want to focus on some of the issues.
Tom, I just don't. It was a good meeting. A lot of people were there. A lot of people are kind of Monday morning quarterbacking, and they're looking for perfection. I think there's some things maybe we need to worry about, but you did a very good job.
Well, yeah,
So
I think it went fine.
Through them all.
Yeah,
I think it
echo
went
that
fine.
sentiment as well.
Yeah,
Yes.
and believe it or not, and some people find this hard to believe, but you know, having over 80 attendees at something like that is very, very good, even if it was a live thing, you know. So I don't think there were any super problems to that. We're not going to get, you know, hundreds of people as some people seem to expect. But anyway, let's go over the issues that we brought up, because again, the changes we would make to the village and harbor zoning is going to come later. Later meaning probably a fall 23 articles when we deal with things like the dimensional table. But to the extent the articles we're shooting for the spring, we discuss definitions and uses, the table of uses. There are some things that we may be dealing with sooner rather than later, and our real substantive discussions will happen when we do address this particular articles that these topics come up in. But I'd like to try as much as possible to develop some consensus among us of, you know, the directions we should go in based on what we heard. And then I also, you know, I don't want there to be this gap between each forum and then just show up at town meeting with articles. I'd like to report back to the public, you know, that we discussed these issues that came up in the forum, and we're starting down a road of this direction, and maybe be a little more concrete in our ideas. The first forum was not intended to be concrete in ideas, but to get a sense of what the community wants. So,
yeah, Tom, can I just give you a little insight from the select board meeting last night?
Yes, which I didn't know about. Thank you.
Yeah. We had KP Law, Carolyn was there, and Judge Cutler. And there are some various things about what the select board would like to see. And one of the suggestions was that there's the framework that we kind of hang all of the stuff on. And KP Law is working on putting that together.
All right,
The
Jack,
Yeah.
don't let me get through the flow. I had a meeting with KP today,
Okay,
So I was brought up to speed, and I'm going to address that topic as we get a little further down the agenda.
okay.
Let me just try to get through this if I could. All right, back to this. The issues about height, I heard two things. We had thrown out the idea of reducing height in the harbor to account for base flood elevation. And I didn't hear any strong sentiments against that. And by the way, with respect to format, during the forum, Lauren and I at the break said, should we be taking a straw poll, even though it's a small sampling of the community? Because we didn't get like any like definitive direction, and that might be a critique to think about going forward. But I didn't hear anything wildly crazy or opposing the idea of limiting height to account for base flood elevation. And so I guess, does anybody else have any thoughts on that, or could we at least have a consensus that that's a direction we will move in with the specific height limit being discussed when we actually get to the table of area regulations, which will be sometime next year.
Which
does
comment
anybody
was
else-
that, Tom? Who had that comment?
This was about the height in the harbor being reduced from 35 feet to account for the fact of base flood elevation has to be brought
Yeah,
into
who
the
said
calculus.
that?
Well, that was one of the things we were bringing up, and I didn't hear anything from anybody at the meetings who really opposed that idea. So I think we should continue to develop that idea when we get to the substance of the table of area regulations. Does anybody disagree that we would head in that direction?
The only comments that I've heard around town are that people do not like the idea of having the base elevation raised and then the 35 feet on top of that.
Right.
So I think we're getting broad support
Okay,
for it.
good. Yeah, and then and in the future, we're going to have to set what that height limit over base flood will be. Will it be 25 feet, 28 feet, something else, so we'll get to that. All right, thank you. As far as height in the village or overall, I did hear a sentiment of let's try to keep the village as it is. And, how many stories is 35 feet? And do we want 35-foot buildings in the village? And, we may already have 35-foot buildings. We probably do. I didn't get I think we tried to deliver a reality check about leaving the village as it is, that's probably not realistic, but I did think we did bring up the point that we're in the range, the range of building heights in bylaws are usually 30 to 35 feet. Yes, we're on the high end, but we're not like outliers about it. And I didn't get a sense, I don't know what anybody thinks about whether in the village or the village generally, we should not have 35 feet.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything otherwise. I think Wayne Sawchuk gave a quite an eloquent recitation of what are the market forces there that kind of require it when you're talking about a 2-story or 3-story building, and sort of what makes things viable in the village, which is the whole idea of the village bylaw to begin with, was to make it viable. So
Okay.
I don't
Yeah.
think any changes would be needed on that.
Right, and separate from the issue about the, whether the idea of bringing in buffer zoning in the village within the harbor, which would be a little different, which we'll get to in a moment. But all right, then we also talked about uses, and we focused. Well, Tim Davis brought up make sure aquaculture is an allowed use in the harbor, and I looked at our uses in the bylaw. And, obviously we're only dealing with the land-based uses, but there really isn't a clear direction that the kind of land side operations that would be done in connection with a fishing industry or an aquaculture industry are not really clearly stated out as uses, and they probably should. So, to Tim's suggestion of including aquaculture, I have no problem with that. And I don't know if anybody else had any thoughts about that. The other
I
thing,
think it's good. If I could on that one quickly, I think it would be good to update some of, because we generally just have sort of the commercial uses in a broad sense, you know, the time and everything has gone way past the bylaw on some of the uses, and you're seeing that in a bunch of other towns as well. So I think to update it to what's sort of common now would be the way to go.
Okay, yeah, I'm just making some notes about that. Thanks. The other
Couldn't
thing we
agree
talked
more.
about. The other
Aquaculture
thing,
seems like a natural fit for a marine industry, waterfront type of
yeah,
use.
I think we need to make sure our uses include things that are necessary for our fishing, our commercial fishing fleet, which everybody wants to preserve. Clark is here, I'll just note that for the record, so we have all 5 of us here, thank you.
And you guys
the other-
talked about height? And,
Yeah, we
and
just-
and what you call the buffer zone, I used to call a transition area.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that one yet. On height, we seem to have a consensus that, you know, based on comments we heard, that we will pursue the idea of a height limit in the harbor over base flood. What that number will be decided when we get to the table of area dimensions. And that despite the sentiment of keeping the village as it is, you know, realistically, we don't need to depart from 35 feet in the village.
Well,
So now
you know,
we get-
it may make sense in that a lot of the harbor areas like Atlantica and the boatyard are in a velocity zone.
Yeah.
In velocity zones, you know, you're up around 17 feet, 8 or 9 feet above base grade anyway. So you know, that gets pretty big, you know, where the cove was 35 feet above basically average grade. Because it was in a flood zone, not a velocity zone. These velocity zones, I do think, make a difference. But if we're limiting things then to like parking at grade and then 2 stories, that may be it. We're not doing 2.5 stories.
Yeah, sorry, Woody just tried to call me. I think he might be trying to get into this meeting, so I'm just responding to him quickly.
Yes, he indicated to
Anyway,
me
but, okay,
he will.
yeah. So the next thing, if I just could keep us moving along, is we discussed the expansion of mixed use in the harbor. And again, other than, you know, we had the one gentleman who was focused on revoking the hotel's permit, which was, he even cornered me at the break too. Is this really a done deal? And I said, yes, it's a done deal. And other than, I think there was one citizen on Zoom who expressed the concern of not wanting to see condos at the end of Parker Ave in the future. I didn't, again, not a lot of strong sentiment about whether we expand mixed use throughout the harbor on the limited number of waterfront properties that there are. So, you know, again, we can take a position now just as a matter of consensus that we do not want to pursue that, or we can leave that discussion when we talk about uses in Article 4, which I plan to have us be discussing in December. So we can defer that, but I don't know if anybody had any other read of the crowd on that issue that I might have missed.
I think one thing that goes into that, Tom, was public access to the harbor and not having the harbor walled off. That was one of the words that was used. So I think, you know, that was one of the things that people were looking for, was to maintain public access to the places that they like to go, that they frequented before and hopefully will in the future. And then, of course, you know, just site-wise, that they're not, you know, that we're not. And I think South Boston was brought up as an example of where, you know, the access to the waterfront got kind of walled off from people.
Yeah, no, I agree. So
I certainly agree. People do not want the harbor condoized. They really don't.
yeah, I think, I mean, if I had to take it from the few comments that were specific about Parker Avenue and the hotel site, I would say the majority sentiment was probably not to have that expanded. And so, you know, as we go forward and look at the table of uses, you know, I think we're in a direction not to go that way with expanding mixed use in the harbor. Um, even if we eliminate the overlay district, however, the remaining property on Elm Street, the higher numbers of Elm Street that are within the overlay district would have some pre-existing rights. So we could still see it, but that would be on the land side of Elm Street. And, you know, I don't think we ever want to see it at the Lobster Pound site or the Atlantica site or Parker Avenue. So, all right. The next issue, again, I don't recall that we got a lot of specific comments, but I didn't hear any opposition to the concept, was on what Clark is calling, you know, transitional zoning or buffer zoning in the village. And here the concept is, you know, increased setbacks and then a height limit within a certain, you know, that's a place where we would step down from the 35 feet, you know, when you're abutting a residential area. And again, this will be something we will deal with in the table of area regulations that we'll be addressing next year. But again, just for tonight's purpose, there's a consensus on, you know, should we continue to pursue that idea and develop, you know, what a bylaw might look like in that direction, or, you know, does anybody have any strong thoughts or read of the crowd on that one?
Well, I mean, what would we have a transition area that goes beyond the existing village, or a transition inside? Because I don't think the village is awful big at this point and if we went beyond the borders of the village, wouldn't that freak everybody out?
Well, are you saying
Or
that
would they smack their lips saying, "Oh, I just gained $500,000 of potential property value"?
are you suggesting we would have on the residential side of the boundary line an increased buffer and a decreased height as well? Is that what you're suggesting? I mean, with
I'm asking the question.
I guess the
I'm
question
asking the
is,
question, where is it? Is it outside or is it inside? I mean, you could have a transition zone that's 100 feet from the village boundary and set up certain conditions there. Or it could be 50 feet or 100 feet inside, but the village is awful small. That means everything is, almost all of it is transition.
I'm trying to help Woody get into this meeting. Hold on one sec.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think the only way we had talked about it in the past and that it was brought up was in the context of there'd be setback limits in the village district where it borders residential district, but not on the other side of the line. So the residential district would have its normal height and setback limits that it has now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been through a dozen different special permit applications for the village over the years, and the issues are the ones that are adjacent to a residential, somebody's house. And you know, you can always make the argument that, hey, you knew you were right next to the village, you knew something could have been built there, but these people have legitimate fear of change and of their property values. And if there is a way that's a win-win to secure their property values and increase the transition area from what's there now, which is, I would say, micro, maybe that's something worth discussing as a committee.
Right. So, I mean, for purposes of tonight and going forward, and, you know, any feedback we give the community, I would say that at this point, we're not dismissing the idea. We'll explore it further and see if something workable can come from it, but we're not dismissing it out of hand at the moment. But
I think I think we should always remember that the overwhelming sentiment that I heard in the last election, which is a good way you listen to everybody, is preserve Cohasset pretty much the way it is. And it doesn't matter who you're talking to when it comes down to, that's why people live here. That's why people stay here. So that's kind of the lodestar, the guiding light. I think we should always look to when we're trying to figure out which way to go. How the transition works and is put together, I think it's this committee's job to do that. But as long as we understand what I think the community wants us to do.
Yeah. Although, I mean, and that sentiment about leaving the village, you know, came up specifically in the comments about the village was brought up, I think, by Ann Brophy a number of times about leaving it as it is. But it's also, you know, unrealistic that we're going to freeze all the properties and no property owner is going to seek to redevelop them. It's just a question of how we guide that redevelopment as much.
Well,
as
that's
possible.
exactly, yeah. That's
Well,
how
you
we
know-
guide redevelopment.
But I think to your point, Jack, people like certain aspects of Cohasset, and they probably have a tolerance for some change, provided that it fits within their image of how Cohasset has been and will be. So it's sort of like a vision of a current Cohasset that is different, slightly different, not
Well,
substantially
exactly.
different.
Exactly. And it's our responsibility to guide that in a way that's consistent with what people are looking for. And it's not always easy, but it's easier to do it if we understand what our goal is. And our goal is really to reflect the community's desire to have the community the way they choose to have it.
Yep.
So anyway, so I agree with you.
Well, I mean, again, I think there's a balance there. I like agreeing, but that's a good thing. There's always a balance there between, you know, the status quo and trying to make things better. And the original changes to the village bylaw was nobody could do anything there, nothing. I mean, the zoning was set up for no change, nothing, locked up. And what we've done is allowed change, but it's in a limited area. So,
Right.
And it's got severe controls.
No change.
And we haven't really seen massive changes in the village, although this new project is going to be talked about for years.
It is, but but we allow change within the constrictions of what maintains what it is. And the other thing,
Yep,
that
the character
I keep
of
looking
Cohasset,
at-
sure. The
Yeah.
character of the village. Yep.
what I keep looking at is we are 8,000 people in a geographically constrained area with limited transportation to any place. And that's what it is. People don't understand. They say, wealthy community, I'll put a little store there. I'll do tremendously well. Not enough house count.
Street traffic, yeah.
Very
Yeah,
simple.
cloth tablecloths. And no, there isn't a captive audience there for cloth tablecloths.
No, so let's be realistic. It is what it is. We love it that way. So anyway.
Sure.
All right, I want to keep moving on. I noticed Mr.
Good.
Farag is out of his car and safe.
I don't know. Excuse me, I have to get my sunglasses.
And
for that.
Woody has joined us. Woody, we're just going over some, discussion of the results of the forum and things we heard. So we're just going over the bullet points we brought up and what consensus we heard from the crowd. Let me just jump to the last bullet about engaging the historical commission. That came up in our meeting with town council that I had this afternoon. And both with respect to the idea of creating a historical district for the village and going back to our discussion of the last meeting when we were discussing Article 12 and adding demolition delay. Town council suggest both of these are non-bylaw issues, that both demolition delay and any expansion of a historic district would fall under the general bylaw. But obviously, I think this committee can weigh in on whether those are two things that we should pursue. And, with respect to the historic commission idea, I didn't expect that to come up, but it came up quite a bit. And I think there was a strong sentiment of expanding or creating other historical districts a la Hingham. So I think that's, again, non-zoning issue, but something we heard loud and clear that at some point we should engage the Historic Commission and the Select Board to discuss whether we actually do that. What that would mean in the village, Clark, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we dealt with 1 Pleasant Street, we had to get an Historical Commission opinion because the building was over 100 years old. So I think the village might already have protections for older buildings, even though it's not a historic district. But, again, it's something we should explore, but council just pointed out that it wouldn't be done in the bylaw if we go that direction.
Tom, on that front, you're right. Woody brought it up in the meeting, and to look at Hingham and Duxbury and how they extended it not just but to other residential districts as well. And I think it's a good idea to look into and to see what would be appropriate or not. But I do think we probably have to have a conversation with the Historical Commission to let them know if there was an extension, what that would mean for them, and sort of what would be on their plate regarding it, and if that's something that they wanted to take on or not in the future.
Yeah, and Jack, that's something I think, that obviously would fall under the jurisdiction of your board to take a lead on too.
Yeah,
So,
my suggestion would be, and I'm absolutely in favor of historic district or districts. However, it's beyond the purview of this committee. So maybe our position as a bylaw committee is that kick it to the select board with a recommendation, favorable recommendation, and then we can get on with our business here.
Yeah, I know, and Woody, I think at the end of the working group, you had brought this up about some historical protections being built into the bylaw. But as I said, today, council weighed in with it just came up tangentially in our discussion that that would be dealt with as a general bylaw rather than a zoning bylaw.
I was going to ask Tom,
You're muted.
Woody,
You're muted, Woody. Yeah, hold on, Cassie. Woody wanted to say something. He was
I'm sorry. Or maybe not, maybe you aren't. We do have a bylaw. It's very limited, as you know, to just the houses around the common, essentially. I mean, it may go down to the Depot Court. I don't know. But if anybody's interested, you ought to, our bylaw absolutely mirrors the State Enabling Act. And one thing that I think is important to understand is that the state recommends, I don't know if it sets, but it recommends the composition of such a commission. Our commission, being very limited in scope, doesn't comport with the state recommendations, which are to have historical preservationists, architects not doing business in town, lawyers not doing business in town, this kind of thing. So that it is perceived and actually is a very neutral kind of body in terms of business affairs. But one of the things, I mean, I don't think it probably wouldn't be wise just to take the present composition of the commission, which are limited to residents or on the common.
I agree.
And if you look at Hingham's just a great example. I know it's a much bigger town, but each person on that commission is hand selected for a whole set of qualities and experiences.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, again, I think it's something this committee can certainly support that Select Board and Historical Commission pursue further. I think that was a loud and clear sentiment that people, at least the people who were there, that they'd like to see some perhaps more historical protections around town. So, all right. And the last bullet issue we had brought up was parking, which. Oh yeah, sorry, yes, I'm sorry, Kathy. Yes,
Woody, do you recall why? I know that we had brought up the additions of or expansion of the historic district. Do you remember why? Were there implications or something that we mentioned why it might be a concern or an issue to expand the existing
Why it might be
historic
what
district?
kind of an issue? You said I missed the word.
An implication or a concern. I thought last time when we discussed this, there was a
concern, negative concern. The Historic District Commission has jurisdiction over more things than even the zoning bylaw. The zoning board of appeals does. For instance, if you're interested in a demolition delay, they can impose a permanent demolition delay. Not that they do that a lot. They can in fact deal with design issues the planning board and the old design review board cannot do. My understanding from talking to the folks in Hingham is that they exercise this their authority wisely, but they don't go around just preventing demolition of houses or things, but they certainly have that right. And I don't know, that concern could have been expressed, but on the other hand, a demolition delay, as you guys all know, it has to be in the town bylaws, and it could be 6 months, a year, 2 years at the absolute max. They never go beyond 2 years. And most of them are 9 months to a year.
Obviously, I'm very much in favor of this, and we have to figure out how to implement it. It's beyond the purview of this committee, so I don't think we want to spend a lot of time on
Yeah,
it.
no,
But we want to recommend that should be. And then Woody, you and I, might speak offline, and you can give me some guidance on what the select board should start working on.
Yeah, all right, so you actually, you
Just
also
one
will have town council weigh in on demolition delay, yeah, as a result of the meeting.
Just one point, Historic Commission might have some involvement with a demolition delay, but I kind of think that, in Woody's shaping of how the Historic Commission works in Hingham, that maybe for the village, what we need is enlivenment of the design review committee. We had a design review committee in the past, and it makes a recommendation to the planning board when asked. And I believe it's been dormant, and it specifically excludes single-family residential design review. But it may be that the design review board is the right tool to get the best quality work in the village, and perhaps deal with other issues if expanded, and that's in the general bylaw.
Yeah.
But it has been inactive, but it's in place. So
Yeah.
I guess my recommendation would be that we, the collective, keep an open mind about perhaps using that design review board tool for the village, instead of or along with the Historic District Commission in terms of their recommendation.
Yeah, if I could just say very quickly, the town does have an Historic District Commission bylaw. I mean, we have an Historic District Commission that actually functions. It's limited in scope and frankly, in terms of experience. Secondly, the major downside, I think I agree, Clark, we ought to have a design review board.
Well, we have one in the general bylaw too.
But it is like, the design review board is like the large home review. It's advisory. It has no authority to change or.
No, it's strictly advisory to the planning board when we're reviewing special permits in the village.
That's all. If I may, it's advisory.
But if I may, it leads us into a discussion of another bullet we brought up at the thing, which was design. And, the planning board now has these design guidelines for the village and the harbor. To the extent we get comments about the new project at Stop and Shop, I think some people would like to see that extended to 3A as well. But, I brought it up, but again, I don't know that we got any big sentiment one way or the other about maybe making the guidelines into regulations where they're a little more toothy, a little more enforceable.
I think the guidelines definitely need to be tightened up, not
if we
just in
have those-
the village, but on 3A as well. And when we're looking at that, if they have to be regulations, that's fine, but those regulations should be in place before we bring changes to the bylaw in the fall of 23. Because if you bring zoning changes and you're doing everything from soup to nuts, and you say, oh, by the way, we're not doing anything about that until the boards get around to doing their own regulations. I think those regulations need to be in place before we do it.
Well, okay, and that can be done outside the town meeting process. And then the question becomes, if we have these, if the guidelines become something a little more toothier and they become regulations, do we need a separate board to administer it, or can the planning and zoning board administer it? And again, the thought there is, it's sending people to more committees than they need to go to.
I mean, the planning board and zoning board should issue and enforce their own regulations. Why would you need someone else to do that?
Well, all right, so we will, I guess, in terms of tonight, we do have consensus to bring some toothier design elements into the commercial areas in town. I guess that's the consensus, and we can explore a little further, because I think changes to regulations, some of the changes we wanted to make by taking a lot of material out of the bylaw, moving into regulations, town council agrees with. We probably can do that fairly quickly and do that before Springtown meeting, and we could include this as well.
Yeah, because I mean, I know. If I
we
could
can
bring one
explore further the idea, if we have a design review committee revived, to be the primary administrator. That, there's pros and cons to that, I think. But
just keep in mind that the planning board is different from the zoning board. The zoning board, in this respect, the zoning board is explicitly prohibited from getting into design elements.
Yeah.
We are not a design board, and there've been plenty of court cases that have slapped people's hands in the zoning board. So you guys have more latitude than the zoning board.
okay.
Yeah, but absolutely. But one of the things is I know with zoning is everyone is always sort of fighting the last war, as it were. Whatever the last project was that people liked or didn't like, that becomes the topic of the next zoning thing to come up. But I think for the planning board, for sure, with their regs, and when we look to, we're not a 3A yet, but when we get to there, if those regulations and things are not in place, that's going to be the thing on the forefront of people's minds when it comes to town meeting, as that these are the things that they want to see either rectified or changed, and they need to be before we present stuff to them. So that was just my take on that.
Whether we keep them as guidelines or make them regulations, bringing in the 3A commercial district would be an easy thing to do if we wanted to do that.
Yep.
So, and particularly if we are going to see a lot of future development as we get into this MBTA mandate, I think it behooves us to have some guidelines in place at minimum.
Yeah,
the last one, yeah, all right.
I can tell you the select board sentiment is pretty clear. There's lots of overall things we need to do, but there will be things like this which clearly need to be taken, action taken sooner rather than later. So in the structure of what we want, we'll have the generic things, but there will be room in the Springtown meeting for these specific things. And town council indicates there are some things that need to be taken care of quickly. So as we proceed, we should be aware of this two-pronged thing, which the select board specifically made policy last night on. So this would probably fall in one of those things that we need to get done. And the select board will support this committee in getting an article or on the town warrant to do that.
Yeah. All right.
No.
Anyway, all right. So I just want to wrap this up. The last bullet point we had brought up at the forum was parking. Again, I think it's mostly a location problem, not a zoning problem. But I think when we do get to Article 7 in our parking bylaw, we should that's probably something where we're going to want to reach out to MAPC or maybe our Weston and Sampson and make sure that the number of spaces we're allocating to each use is the state of the art, but again, really it's a location problem. And a lot of people brought up to me on the breaks about the area that's available in the village adjacent to the current parking lot and next to the train tracks, behind the teen center. That's not a zoning issue. And Jack, that falls in your boards again. I really think we ought to encourage that, because as we see more development in the village, there's just be increasing pressure. There's an area where some people are suggesting 100 spaces could be provided.
It's a
It's
big
behind-
piece of ledge behind the, next to the, barn for Red Lion.
Oh,
Yeah.
it goes up
And the
the hill
track.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
it requires,
A
it
monster.
requires blasting and stuff.
monster piece of ledge, but it
Yeah.
is huge. It's a huge area. And,
Yeah.
you know, I suppose you could set up a parking bank like the sidewalk bank concept that other towns have had. um, to help encourage the people who are benefiting from more parking in the village to pay in a fair way.
Good idea. The only
Clark,
other thing,
A ballpark what that might cost.
it's been looked at before, Jack. The estimates will be old at this point, but people have looked at it in the past.
Okay.
It does require some blasting, but you can also have a parking lot that's on a hill too. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
reason you have to, it doesn't mean you have to do it flat to the grade of the current
I know,
parking.
I just, we've got free legal from you. I'm on free architect from Clark. Even
Yeah,
handed.
the cost of blasting behind the town hall, that was figured out a couple of years ago for the potential use of an available parcel back there. And so the cost would be similar. So I would suggest that Brian Joyce probably has that information, and we could probably use
Yeah.
that as a milestone ballpark.
But that's something for select board, not the purview.
Yeah,
of-
no, it is. It is. The only other thing in parking that we brought up, but I don't recall hearing any great sentiment one way or the other, was the idea of in the village of allowing properties in proximity to the town lot to be able to use them towards their count. But again, when we get to the specifics of the dimensional and parking requirements, we can revisit that issue, but I didn't hear a sentiment really for or against continuing that idea.
Sometimes people bring up structured parking as the ultimate solution.
Yeah.
And I think that's a last resort. A lot of communities have found after building structured parking that it has a erosive factor in downtown areas of safety issues and lighting. So I wouldn't want anyone to think that structured parking is I don't think it's a real solution for us. That remote lot off of Pleasant Street
Mhm.
is exactly the right size for a small structured parking that could be maybe 3 stories or 4 levels and still be below 35 feet. But I just don't see, and from a design perspective, you can make, it's an eyesore, right? But you can, if you do it right, you can make structured parking not look awful.
Right.
I just think it's sort of a last resort approach to problem solving for us.
Yeah, well,
All right.
I agree.
All right,
Okay.
I think, let me just.
Sorry, I missed Jack's comment.
No, I was just saying, they just swallowed and took a new development there at One Pleasant. I'm not sure that neighborhood's likely to, if you want to talk about a structured parking garage there.
Oh, yeah, well, that's your neighborhood, Jack, but no, I
Wouldn't
agree
bother
with you.
me,
I don't
it
think,
wouldn't bother me personally because I would not be impacted.
I don't think it's a good idea.
All right.
That's all I'm
So,
saying.
why are we discussing it if we agree?
Because
All right,
people
yeah,
bring it
let-
up
I
from
want-
time to time,
All
and
right, let's get
I
back.
want
to-
that.
we're talking about parking in the village. That's the only reason why we're talking about
I
it.
need a gavel. I need a gavel.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
want to
Mr.
keep us moving along.
Chair.
So
Get this meeting in order.
before we leave the first forum, was there any other topic, sentiment that any of you heard that I don't recall from the public that is something we should be looking into or pursuing further? I don't think there was. Anything? All right.
I think there was a comment, we needed more debonair leaders like you.
I'll stop it. May I please? I And again, I think it would behoove this committee, so I've written some notes here, some consensuses we've reached, consensi, I don't know how you say them, plural, about things we're going to continue to explore, and we should report back and can put out publicity pieces so that people know we heard them, and, you know, at least give them an idea now of more substantive directions we're going to go in. All right, the next agenda item is to discuss the next forum, since this is our only meeting before it. Cassandra, if you could pull up the slideshow when you get a chance. So I sent out an email roughly outlining it, and then Cassandra and Justin quickly had the actual draft slideshow ready.
Are you
So-
talking about the one that I sent the other day? Just
Yeah,
for clarification.
the one
Okay.
for the next forum, yeah.
I just want to make sure I pull up the right one.
So right now, in terms of the behind the scenes planning for this, and by the way, Clark, since you're going to be a featured speaker for the December one, we will be having a meeting before that forum and we'll discuss it, but your materials need to be ready like in the next couple of weeks so that we can have this behind the scenes organizational meeting, because we're pulling together various speakers for that. So it's not something that's last minute. It's something, you know, I hope you're pulling together sooner rather than later, just as a heads up for that. So for this next forum,
Okay,
I am simply going to do welcome, and then I'm sitting down. Lauren is going to present the state mandates that we deal with, 40B, the new housing choice legislation. We are also not only going to have the same MAPC facilitator for the Q&A session, but we are also going to have an MAPC staffer who is an expert on housing issues, one of their in-house experts on it. So that individual may help with Lauren's presentation and certainly will be able to help with answering questions. So there's the topics that Lauren is going to discuss. We're going to have 3 presentations total, and the plan at the moment is to do them all together back to back, and then save all the Q&A and comments to the end rather than breaking it up. The second presentation will be, I believe it's going to be Paul Kearse of the Affordable Housing Committee, and he's going to give the executive summary of the current housing production plan. And since they already have done a presentation to the select board with that, they're basically just going to borrow their slideshow from that. And Lauren's done something on this too recently to the select board. So all of these materials were readily available to be put together. And then finally, we will hear from Woody to speak about the accessory dwelling bylaw, our current bylaw, speculation on why it's underutilized, and what we might be able to do to change it. And Woody has shared with you from the diagnostic that already KP recommends we have to do some updating to our bylaw anyway to comply recent amendments to state law. So,
You know, very late, I think it was around 6 o'clock or 5:30, I sent my quick analysis of KP Law's comments, and most of them agree with the draft that the bylaw working group did a year and a half ago.
okay,
So that wasn't kind of new stuff.
okay, good.
With one exception, and I can get to that later.
Okay, good. And then you know, since the working group had come up with some thoughts on this, you know, I would hope you will present those thoughts so that, again, we can get feedback from it.
Sure.
So again, we will have the benefit of an outside MAPC person helping on this. And I hope you got a chance to look at the slides. I don't know if you want to look through them, Cassandra, quickly, but
Sure, I can do that.
I think, you know, again, there'll be relatively short presentations and, you know, looking for the feedback of the community. And the big question for the community in my email, you know, Lauren can give the data about where we are in 40B. I'd like Lauren to be able to explain where our 40B units are, because it's really just a couple of big big projects, Avalon being the biggest, that eats up most of our number, that provides the numbers that we have. We, here, I think 60 Elm Street is the next biggest. And then, our discussion is, we as a committee, as we're sitting there taking questions and comments, we have to think about how do we translate these things into zoning. And what I am a little concerned about, because I don't know how much public play the housing production plan is, but if we get the sentiments like we did at the first forum, regarding keeping Cohasset as it is and no change and don't do anything, and what if we get some people in the audience who are resistant to the idea of adding multifamily to town, or who actually, when they hear the details of the housing production plan, dispute the housing production plan. So,
Well, Tom, I think it's likely that there's going to be some people.
yeah, and I think we just need to be prepared to address it. So I gave a heads up.
And whatever the downside is, I think we need to talk about frankly and try and deal with it if we even go down that road.
Yeah, and I want a part of the discussion to be, the consequences of not complying with 40B. I think we know what those consequences are, but also the consequences of not following this housing choice initiative, which at least one select person has said to me, maybe it's not something we have to worry about, because the penalties, which is taking away certain grant money, is not something we get anyway. So, I think we need a frank discussion on
Right.
whether we even worry about that one. I don't think 40B we have a choice, because it can bring in an unfavorable development that we lose control over.
Yeah, Tom, I could speak to that. And I was not the one who made that comment, but I think that there might be some sentiment which says, I think we get a little bit, but we don't get enough. It's like the tail wagging the dog.
Right.
So for what they're saying we have to do is just completely beyond the pale of possibilities.
Yeah.
We can't put 800 units by the train tracks. There's no room.
Yeah. The number I understand for Cohasset would be 600 at the moment. It was 750. It's crazy stuff. But, and I asked Lauren to try to develop, since we don't have multifamily housing, it's hard to compare what the MBTA mandate density would be compared to existing. But we do have Avalon, and we can draw a density conclusion from that. And the Situate Hill site that we've recently permitted for a commercial use, it's 8 acres. I did a rough calculation. If we use the MBTA's density, which I think was 15 units to an acre, you can do the math. What is 8 times 15? And so we can hopefully show people with few examples we have what that density would be compared to what we have for existing density. Not only under, well, at least under Avalon's are only active, comparison, or maybe some of our condo developments would be a comparison. But, I think we need to be very straight and frank with people about the future direction, because multifamily housing, has some consequences. It's going to add to the population, maybe add to the school population. And that has a lot of fiscal consequences. So
even accessory dwellings make multifamily. I mean, it's multifamily on one lot.
Right.
You probably saw this, like it was a New Yorker article a couple of weeks ago about ADUs in Los Angeles, how they're actually four times the number of permits for accessory dwelling units in Los Angeles compared to regular houses. They've got a unique sort of narrow, deep lot configuration that's a typical thing out there, but they're seeing it applied where the housing needs are great and enormous numbers. And I think that's something to take to heart.
Have they incentivized it in a certain way? Is that why they're getting?
they've made it possible for a lot of the towns in the Los Angeles area to do it. But yeah, they're encouraging it because it's small scale, it's controllable, and there's a lot of upside compared to big apartment buildings or tear downs of neighborhoods, that kind of thing. I mean, you could effectively, increase a neighborhood by 50%, 25% with the same land area, the number of dwelling units, easily.
I was just going to ask a question to Jack regarding the decision on North Main Street. Does anything related to that relate here, Jack, about the North Main Street project being denied?
Well, the North Main Street project really, what the problem with that is the developer really didn't show up. So we have no idea, and there wasn't any presentation. It was just, hey, would you give me this to me? And don't ask me to tell you what I'm doing. So I have no idea where that is now, but it was not a seriously presented, project.
Got it.
And
Okay.
it didn't show up the second.
There was nothing for you guys to take into consideration, I guess.
No, but it could be considered as another example of density. That was 20 units for however many acres that site is. And what would the MBTA mandate do to that site? Because that site's clearly within the,
Oh, sure.
radius of the train station. So it would,
I don't even think I'd be surprised if it's much more than an acre. Because it was 2 house lots and they were the small, very small house.
yeah. The MBTA, the zoning for the MBTA mandate has to have a minimum of 5 acre lots. And when you look at that area at 3A, we don't have a lot of 5 acre lots up there.
No.
Not as many as you think. But
And hence, some people saying, the price of their penalty, even if they could do a penalty, was so much less than the beginning cost of just planning for implementation that, and I remember I heard that comment too. I don't remember which select board member, made it, but it was kind of offhand and I don't think, anyway.
It's something to think about and
Yes.
discuss with the public at the next forum. And, and then if we don't do the MBTA mandate, still, then we have our housing production plan. And do we still plan for some type of multifamily or mixed use on 3A? That's another policy debate for the town. To give us
And I'm
feedback.
looking at Mr. Farag, who.
Yeah, David, go ahead. Sorry.
Within the agenda for that night of the forum, one of the things I wanted to be in there was regarding, I know we currently have a senior overlay district that was seldom used. I think there was only 2 permits ever issued. Only 1 was acted upon in the time that was there.
It's gone.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's gone though. The bylaw
Oh,
doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, okay. Well, I think we wanted to look at is you wanted to hear from people is if they wanted to see a senior overlay district again with a 55 plus housing, and if it should be incentivized to get more of it. Because when it was there before, one of the projects that did go through but was not built was the Cedarmere project, which was permitted for 110 units. But after it got permitted, the project went bankrupt because it was around that 2008, 2010 time. And then it stayed as rubble until Toll Brothers took it over, many years later. So there was some a little bit of success, but never found to fruition. So I would want to hear from people, is the 55 plus something that they would like to see? Because that is in the master plan and stuff, is to see some more senior housing and things of that nature. In other words, people on the on coming into the housing market on the young end and on the older end, to get those 2 going. So I think that's something that should be injected somewhere.
Yeah, what we'll do is, and Cassandra, maybe make a note of this, we'll ask the MAPC expert about that, about the state of senior housing, because frankly, you don't see 55 and over projects being proposed around here like we did 15 years ago. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think,
well, it sounds good, but yeah, there is a reason. It's because they weren't uptaking units, that family housing was something that was really needed. 55 sounds good. The kids are all gone. You don't have to pay for schools. But a lot of developments that were 55 plus or are asking that that condition be removed.
Yeah.
And it may be something that the housing expert from MAPC, that we can have them make a point of that. But
Yeah.
housing diversity, the idea of senior housing, and housing diversity, those are good words, but I think 55 plus is
Yeah.
a thing of the.
It's very interesting, the way in which Pine Hills dealt with that. Very interesting. I knew those guys when they were first building it. I was talking.
Company.
Yeah, well, not really. Tony Green was part of it, but there was a separate partnership, and the Green Company per se ended up as being one of the merchant builders for some of the neighborhoods. But the three guys who had the partnership, they went to Plymouth and they said, we can design something in which the units are not, anybody can buy them, but they are all designed. So they're perfect for seniors, but the master bedroom's on the first floor. The second floor is kind of an atrium, like a guest bedroom, but not really for kids. It's very well thought out, specifically to not be family friendly, and it worked.
Yeah, I think there was another legal reason that 55 and over wasn't enforceable. I think the federal courts had something to say about it years ago, but you don't see those developments anymore, like you did. So, but we'll ask. I think that's something the MAPC person is probably ideal to weigh in on. And frankly, I don't know if our housing production plan talks about them at all. But
and again, to what Jack said is I think there's other ways that can be incentivized. In other words, if you have a development with first floor master, one bedroom upstairs, but with a loft, things of that nature, they tend to grab, and also the size of the house. That has a lot to do with, is it something that seniors would look at? So if you build something like, say, Wheelwright Farm today, you're going to get, de facto, it's going to be almost a 55 plus where people are going to look at it because the way it's set up. So, but I'd like to hear from the MAPC and then also from the townspeople to see, is this something that they want to see incentivized, whether it is a blanket 55 plus or just incentivized vis-a-vis the zoning with what a project would have.
Okay, good. To the extent you all looked at the slideshow, is there any other particular comments about the presentation and the order of the presentation?
I've got a very quick one for Cassandra. It went right by as you were flipping through it. First I've seen it. The bylaw, as Clark well knows, ADU bylaw came in January 2020, 2000. So that your slide said 18 years, it's really 20 years and almost 21. By the time this thing gets presented to the town, that bylaw will have been in existence on the books for 21 years. Just a small edit. So
Yeah, no, that's good to know. I had actually taken that information from the documents that you had sent over, which didn't even occur to me that you made those a couple of years ago. So I can update that now.
Okay.
And I suppose we will have data on how many have actually been permitted under that bylaw,
Which?
the ADUs.
Sure. One.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Real easy to remember that one.
Yeah.
And
I will tell you, I would do it if it weren't for having to upgrade my septic system.
well, there's another reason, and we don't have to look any farther than Situate. Situate has 122 ADUs when I last counted. And what's the difference between our two towns? We allow by right conversion of a single family into 2 or more family dwellings. Situate prohibits it. So as a result, you've got, and frankly, a conversion by right is a lot easier than going through anybody's ADU, whether it's got a lot of hoops to jump through or just a couple. And consequently, I don't know about your neighborhoods, but I can go from the Red Lion Inn all the way down to South Main Street to where my daughter lives at Beechwood Street, and almost every house has an apartment. Not all of them are permitted, but they all have it because they can convert from a single to 2-family house with no or very little sweat, and particularly if the lots are and structure was pre-existing. Before
Okay.
1955, not even the requirement that, let's take area, District A, where you need whatever it is, 12,000 square feet. I can't remember what the hell it is now, but you don't even need to comply with the lot size requirement if it's a pre-existing lot. And just about half of all Cohasset lots are pre-existing. So you can do the math. I mean, this all makes perfectly good sense when you step back. And
it's as of right for two family. It's
Yeah.
special permit with the zoning board for 3 or more than 2.
yeah, but
As
most
of
of them,
right.
at least in my area here, are 2, Clark. You're right. Well, no, actually, the requirement isn't it just that you have to have, I'm taking District RA.
Yeah,
but
certain.
it's different.
Yeah, you have to have a certain area over the
But it's
minimum.
6,000 more square feet, but only if it's a new structure, a structure after 55. And you're right, a conversion of a 1-family as a dwelling for more than 2 families does require a special permit. But again, the requirements are pretty simple. They don't deal with, alteration of the structure. They don't deal with this, that, and the other thing. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying that,
Yeah, you could do whatever you want rather than
yeah.
not change
so-
the exterior appearance.
And I
Would
mean,
would we be
David,
recommending?
David, you grew up in a 2-family house. Right next door to me, and although it was never kind of so listed. And
Would we
nothing
be-
wrong with it.
would
I
we
mean,
be
there's a
recommending
need,
getting-
what?
Would we be recommending getting rid of as of right and
No,
go to Situate's model?
what, of not allowing a conversion of a single family? I mean, I
Correct.
think that would be a hornet's nest.
Okay,
Well, you brought it up, Tom. I mean, the real prohibition to this taking off and the control is the lack of septic capacity.
Yeah.
And, where Little Harbor development was held back by the septic capacity for decades by lawsuits, finally, it cracked open. So if sewer capacity gets expanded throughout town or in some particular neighborhoods, then that may allow people to make decisions that increase the equity in their properties, and as well as their potential for income while living here in Cohasset.
Clark, you're much closer to this professionally than I am. I don't know how many of the houses that have an accessory apartment or have actually gone through the whole legal chain, including getting, a septic expansion if they're on town sewer or not. I don't know. I mean, I don't have one myself, so.
Well, if they predate Title V, that would be, 95,
Yeah,
I think it
thereabouts,
was.
yeah.
Then that's a certain class of multifamily, and then anything after that would be a different animal.
But yeah, I think you're right. I think if you get rid of some of the impediments to ADUs, you would still, that's great. You would still be left with the issue of septic.
Right.
Water's not an issue, but
Yep.
I think septic is. And it all depends on where you're located, that's all.
Yeah.
And we can't do anything about that in terms of zoning.
Title V is Title V. I mean, they don't have any exceptions for the fact that there may be a need for affordable housing
Right.
or housing diversity in a community. It's just, it's not related at all.
It is what it
No,
is.
I-
If you need Title V, if you're on sewer, that's a different issue.
yeah, and I don't get grandfathering either with Title V. I'd have to upgrade my tank and the whole 9 yards, so. All right, so if we're all set with that, thank you for the changes. Cassandra, Laura, and I will get in touch with the MAPC people to update them. We'll follow that form. We'll be at the same place on Monday, the 7th, TV and Zoom, the same time. Woody, I understand Justin wants to do a publicity piece with you, a little quick camera interview. I just did one on the Common as the follow-up to the forum. He does it in 5 minutes. Do You're gonna become a star. You're gonna become a media
I mean,
star.
that makes me nervous.
No,
I don't
it's
want to be
pretty,
a star.
you're gonna be a media star in
Oh,
Cohasset,
yeah.
so.
You already are, Woody. You already are.
All right. So, good.
Only in-
All right. So we'll see everybody on the 7th. And again, everybody on the committee who feels, free to make a comment, answer a question. And we'll,
And on the 7th, just to reiterate the obvious, I think it's obvious. Our job is to listen, to solicit input, perspectives, as opposed to tell people we've got the answer and here it is.
Mhm.
Is that
correct, except in your particular case, you might discuss some of the solutions that the working group had discussed. So we could get some feedback on that direction about whether that's something we should be pursuing.
No, I
further.
think ADUs are an arrow in our quiver. It's not
Yes.
a one size fits all kind of.
I think the ADUs, I've always been a proponent. I've seen what it can do, and it can be a very helpful thing in a community properly handled. So it could be an important part of the housing mix. I think you have to be aware that you don't allow an ADU to the detriment of the house next door. On the other hand, you don't let the house next door kill an ADU just because they don't want a multifamily next
Yeah,
door.
I mean, one statistic that we don't have, and I suppose if I really wanted to do it, we could figure it out, is how many, if you will, quasi ADUs exist as we speak
Mhm.
today that are below the radar screen?
A lot, I would
A
imagine.
lot, I think.
Well, gee whiz, we did analysis of this way back in Housing Committee 1.
20 years ago.
Tom. Yeah, we did an inventory of
Did
those.
you find a lot or not?
I think there were a huge number. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, and this is
Under the
where,
radar.
That's just my anecdotal take
Yeah.
on this.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
This
we
is
have the
where,
numbers. I wonder if they're still available from that
well, yeah,
time period.
this is where Katie Dugan used to go to the assessor's office, and the codes that they use to code properties and identify properties. She used to find a lot of interesting stuff, and I wonder if the
But the
assessor's
analysis
office.
was done 2006, 2007.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm wondering if the assessor's office has data.
it's probably not totally out of date then.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about housing, I really feel strongly that there's some housing types that are very, very popular in other parts of the country. And I think they resonate for creating housing diversity here. One is the concept of the pocket neighborhood. It's where you have different housing types and some shared parking, but it's small scale housing from 800 to 2,000 square foot units on a relatively small parcel. We haven't really seen it, and those duplexes on the other side of the tracks in the village don't really do that. In fact, I was trying to talk that developer into doing pocket.
Clark, is that
Pocket
kind of
neighborhood.
like Kendall Village? Aren't the homes over there a little smaller?
Like that, but with a little bit more kind of good design.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
design
I
is a
think-
little dated, but yeah, it's that sort of small scale and flexible, but with better design metrics.
Yeah, well,
But there's also the pocket neighborhood. There's compact and cottage style units, and of course micro housing. These all are attractive, can be attractive. They don't have to be attractive, but I think it being attractive helps create value and sell the concept of housing diversity.
Yeah, but
I
Clark,
did see a
isn't
couple of
Wheelwright Farm
examples.
Sort of that,
I'm sorry.
isn't Wheelwright Farm sort of that cottage type?
It is. It's just that it's spread out, so
I
it's
get you.
less of a pocket neighborhood than
You're
than
thinking
a
more,
sprawl.
more dense than. Okay, I know.
Right. I mean, we have cluster district housing, and Toll Brothers was done under that, where with 10,000 square foot per house kind of lots, and then shared space. But I think that there's an opportunity for projects with 4, 8, 16 units that look great. And there were a couple of examples that I've collected over the years. One was a study by the MAPC that I just emailed to Lauren and Cassandra to send to everybody, as well as an architect that Pete Matchik and I met with for hours named Hoyt Cousins, who has a practice out in Utah, but he just happened to be visiting and stopped into our planning board. He has these little kind of pocket neighborhood concepts that I think we could solicit the feedback if we showed some of these concepts during our presentation at the next hearing. So I'll forward them if they haven't been forwarded yet, and then, you know, everybody can decide whether you think it's relevant or not. But I really feel strongly that there's some great concepts out there that can help sell
Yeah,
housing diversity
is
that we
that-
haven't
is-
seen.
Is that on development of raw land though? I mean, you're not good, like, for example, my
You know,
cul-de-sac.
redevelopment or development, it doesn't really matter.
Oh, all right, that's fine. Yeah, I mean,
But the
unlikely. like, for
concept is
example, my
it's a half
cul-de-sac.
acre or an acre or two
Yeah.
kind of scale, as opposed to the mega building that we saw
Mm-hmm.
out on the train tracks on North Main Street.
It
couple weeks
might-
ago.
It might lead to a complete rethink of our cluster development bylaw.
Good, yeah. I mean,
When
how
we-
is
when
our
we get
cluster
to that- when we
development
get to
bylaw
that
working?
point. All right, but that's another topic. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
remind the MAPC rep if she can address, and you can certainly bring it up during the course of the forum. All right, we're done with forum business. I'll just say the third forum at the moment, Clark, again, you're still on tap to talk about sustainable development, low impact development. And your materials, you know, hopefully will be developed by the middle of November so that, you know, behind the scenes, we can prepare for it and prepare a slideshow. We have engaged Tom Bell of the ConsCom to talk about climate resiliency, and we've had a few more emails back and forth today. So I believe he is engaged in that, but I also think it's going to be another topic where, you know, the climate resiliency and low impact development. I'm going to ask MAPC if they have a particular expert who can go to that forum as well. And that forum is going to be, I forget what Monday night, but it's in early December, so we don't conflict with Christmas. All right, thank you all. And next I want to move to some of the more substantive parts of the meeting about the bylaw itself. And let me start by reporting, you know, a little change in the agenda here. So today I had a meeting, Cassandra was there. Cassandra will correct any of my misconceptions reporting it. It was a very frank and open discussion with myself, town manager, and both representatives from town council, Carolyn and Judge Cutler. And you know, we discussed the path forward. I was unaware of the select board meeting. I'm not going to get into that. I'll talk to Jack about that later. But you know, about the path going forward and that we're moving forward. And in the end of the day, we came to certain understandings. So one of the things that, you know, we had done as a working group and as the beginning of this committee is, you know, we settled on a format that we took from Concord, that the bylaw would be organized like the Concord bylaw, which only has 10 articles, and actually cut it down to 9. KP is recommending a 20 article bylaw. And, you know, we discussed that today about, you know, there is a way it's done in Massachusetts. It's not mandated, but there is a way that all bylaws seem to follow a model. And it goes back to when the state first came out with model zoning bylaws. So we're probably going to go in that direction, and they'll make all the arguments as to why we should do it that way. And I did point out, well, following the town of Concord, and it's not, you know, it's not an outlier bylaw. But anyway, I'm not going to go to the mat over the organization of the bylaw. But so they also agree about the regulatory, you know, taking stuff, all the application materials and stuff out into the regulations. They are, and I guess this was agreed on last night with the select board, you know, we're still going for the mostly organizational stuff for the Springtown meeting, maybe some substantive stuff, because there is some that gets tied to the reorganization. And then the meatier stuff, such as the table of area regulations, would be in the fall, and we would be having forums on that next year. And we would also, there's still one area of research that we need to do with respect to the table of area regulations that I pointed out, which either a current project in Cohasset will give us a live world example, or we will have to do some research. And that's regarding whether we made any change to frontage. The working group had, so we're on the same page. We just, I guess we had to clear the air and having different approaches to it, and who's reporting to who, who's what, blah, blah, blah. But I think we're all on the same page at this point. So with respect to the fact that at our last meeting, we discussed, and we went over the diagnostic points and my suggested redraft of Articles 1, 12, and 13. We left it that, I'm not going to discuss that tonight. We added, you'll notice I added Woody's comments to it and redistributed the notes. KP is going to come back before our next meeting with all the rewrites that they feel are necessary in Articles 1, 12, and 13. Now, whether Article 1's 12 and 13 get combined into one article like I would prefer and stays separate as they want to prefer, not a big issue, but the substantive changes into those three articles will all be coming back to us at the next meeting. So there's no need for us to discuss it tonight. They also talked to the select board last night, apparently about 6 articles for the Springtown meeting. I envisioned as many as 12, but they haven't written those 6 warrant articles yet, but they certainly have an idea and they're going to present that as well. So with our substance, they said, keep going. We agreed to keep going. Do what we did, after last week. I create this discussion document with proposed changes, all the KP points that are taken from the diagnostic, and I am going through their diagnostic religiously and checking off everything that they've commented on. And then we'll produce notes, and then Judge Cutler will take those and translate it into actual text where we need text. Again, taking into account textual drafts that have been made, textual, our existing bylaw text, et cetera, et cetera. So that's probably how we'll work going forward. I can envision us we're going to deal with definitions starting tonight. The Article 3, which is the districts, very few changes proposed, if any. It's really just consolidation of districts. They agree that'll probably be a very short meeting, but we'll discuss that, start on that hopefully on our meeting on the 30th. And then we will, as far as substance, we will probably, and I argued that we need to, because the definitions are tied to the uses, is probably get into Article 4 during December with the table of uses and the whole use article. And we agree, I think we agree, we're on the same page about simplifying the table of uses, which has a laundry list. And Woody reminded us about that dog use on 3A that had to go to land court because our list is so micromanaging. But again, there are points where we can't get too simple. And so that's what we're probably all going to be going for. And then all of these reorganizational housekeeping articles would be brought together, whether it's 1 or whether it's 6 or 12, however many are needed to accomplish it, will be in the spring. I said to them that we would probably have a public forum on those rather than just present them at town meeting, probably before we go to the planning board's hearing, so that if we get public feedback and we can still make some tweaks before we get into the formal hearing process on zoning articles and the formal review of the other boards. Judge Cutler did bring up that perhaps sooner rather than later, we should address the non-conforming article. So that may be a substantive bit of fruit the fruit on the tree that we deal with in the spring. And we discussed briefly that, you know, I can tell you, Judge Cutler finds our version of the merger doctrine, or the lack of the merger doctrine, problematic. She understands all the history we went through in the working group of thinking about changing it, and then Bjorklund coming up with that SJC case. So we may take up Article 8 sooner rather than later. I got the sense from KP that it is something we should take up sooner rather than later. So I mentioned that, you know, Woody, I said, you know, I hope that the zoning board would weigh in on that. There's a draft with 4 choices of what to do about the single lot exemption.
Huh.
Maybe there's 5 choices, but you know.
Don't get me started.
No. But I'm going to suggest to you that if your board, I think, should weigh in on this.
Sure.
My vision is that you would always have taken the lead on that. That particular article would have been something this committee would have subbed out to you. But I think you should, if in your time frame of when you want to discuss it on your board, think about it at this point about going to Springtown meeting.
Okay, well, our next meeting is the middle of November because of
Yeah.
the election and things.
So,
can
you
even
know,
take it up
I think
then.
it's critical
Then
that,
we can deal with this offline.
right, it's critical that the zoning board, I think, weigh in on Article 8, you know, and
All right, sooner the better.
And
I
then,
think.
you know, so these changes we're making, we'll put them on KP's framework rather than my framework. I don't care. I'm not going to go to the mat over that stuff. We also agreed that we are going to need some kind of transitional warrant article to deal with the fact that part of the bylaw would change in the spring and other parts of the bylaw will still survive until the fall. And to the extent we change definitions, or if we change the use table but not the dimensional table, we just got to make sure we have some transitional rules in place. And KP, I'd always envisioned we'd need that, and KP agrees, and they'll end up drafting something like that. It's not impossible to do. It's not common, but you know, we are doing the bylaw in 2 pieces, so we're going to have some transitional rules. So as far as the substance, Articles 1, 12, and 13, we had our discussion, we put in our notes. KP is going to come back with rewrites of everything hopefully by our next meeting. And then we'll put it aside. You know, I don't want to keep dwelling on articles ad nauseum in the way Cohasset overstudies things. We need to keep moving on because it is you know, we basically have to have ready for the Springtown meeting. We have to have everything in place by probably February. So that then we can go out to the public, that we can go to the planning board. In the meantime, we also discussed KP is probably going to set up another seminar with the planning board. You know, Carolyn heard the comments from the planning board at our last meeting after the forum. We will probably have some you know, in-house training on the planning board's role under Chapter 40A, Section 5, and the whole process. So, also came up today too with, you know, the interaction of the select board and KP and your meeting last night is that, you know, I suggested, since I don't believe, even though we solicited 2 more members for the committee at the forum, I don't know that we've had any applications, but
No, it's
you know,
not.
if the select board is going to be more involved than I had envisioned, which is fine, it's their prerogative. You know, the planning board has 2 members here. I think the select board ought to. And you and I have discussed offline that before, and I think that's something you should consider, because one of the frustrations I had is breaking things up with having to run to everybody's meetings on schedule, and it's going to slow us down if everything we do then has to go to some Tuesday night selectmen's meeting at some select board meeting. So I know you're the liaison, and I hope you're reporting back to your committee. Clark and I will continue to report to our committee, but I just wanted to throw out the idea that perhaps a second select board member on this committee would be helpful.
Well, we can, but, understand, we set this committee up. And we did. We pulled it out of planning. We set this committee up exactly to do that. And the select board is not micromanaging at all. But we did indicate last night that some of the ways we'd like to see it handled. And so we've set, policy on high, and we're not micromanaging the decisions. We're not micromanaging. What we did last night is discuss and listen to KP Law, and they had some good points. We like the idea of having an overall structure, which is why instead of hiring a consultant, we brought it in-house, and we have them report to you or this committee, and you're doing a good job. So may I finish?
Yeah.
So when we say that what we're hearing in order to move this forward, that we think that we like the overall structure putting together, but we recognize that there may well be things in which there is a need to address it sooner rather than later. And that's all that we are to do. We are not telling you various things to do. That is the role of this committee. And we certainly do not want to have the select board being involved in what this committee is doing. It's hands off. We're
All
listening.
right. I think Cassandra can confirm that, again, we met for an hour and a half, and I will admit I got heated at times at the beginning, and Chris facilitated very well, and we cleared the air. We had a very frank adult conversation on lines of authority and who's reporting to who and how we're going to actually do this going forward. So that right now, the working plan is we're doing what we're doing, which is I set out a discussion document with proposed changes, the diagnostics, comments and changes. We discuss it here in a committee. We make our notes, we give those to KP translates into language, and that's how we'll proceed. So without further ado then, since we're not going to discuss Articles 1, 12, and 13 anymore, we are going to go to the definitions. And that's a lot of material to cover. So I don't expect that we'll get it all tonight, but so let me just start at the beginning of this discussion document with organization of the definitions.
Mind if I say goodbye?
Yeah, you can, Woody. I appreciate it.
And how much fun it's been, but
Thanks, Woody. Good to see you.
Well,
good to see all of you, and thank you for
be
doing this
careful.
work.
We're roping you in as a committee member if you're not careful.
Yeah, I know. That's what I want to get. I want to get out of town.
You just
before-
keep quiet.
before it's too
This
late.
has worked well so far.
Yeah, I know. All right. No, Woody, we appreciate it. And
Okay.
Woody.
we'll see you
All
on
right.
the
Stay in touch. You got
Thank
it.
you.
We'll see how.
All right. So anyway, if we look at this discussion document, we have bylaws, we have definitions all over the Bible. And it has always been the consensus of the working group and this committee, to the extent we discussed it, to consolidate them in one place. And as I point out, KP in the diagnostic is saying not always. They think that there are some specialty articles or sections where if the definitions are just focused solely on that section, they might be kept in the section. And so when they do give us feedback on this, that is, KP will make its argument for that. So that's not an issue we have to really resolve at the moment. My organizational proposal was to break it up into categories of definitions in the interest of user friendliness, whereas our current bylaw and what KP would continue to recommend is just straight alphabetical of all terms. Again, I'm not going to the mat over that one. So I leave it to this committee if you think the idea of category-based category sub-organization of the definitions is fine, or straight alphabetical. I no longer care one way or the other, so I'm perfectly happy with going with straight alphabetical. But in this discussion document, I did show you my organizational structure by attaching it as another document. And I also attached the draft of a new table of uses, because a lot of these definitions would tie into what the table of uses say, what the table of uses consists of and what's listed. So organizational issues aside, if you look, this is many, many pages, but we can, there were a lot of definitions that KP had no specific comment about whatsoever. There's a philosophical approach about, not defining every word you need to define and using plain and ordinary meaning or accepted trade or industry terms. Again, KP will comment substantively on that point when we get our comments to them, and then they get it back to us. So that's also an issue that's not necessarily resolved, but I pointed out to them like the changes in the introductory paragraph. Why can't I?
Could you clarify what you're trying to say, Tom?
I'm trying to. Yeah,
Please.
it's not easy stuff. So
I know it isn't.
well, I look at the introductory paragraph. So the black is the existing, and then I'm just suggesting a change. This indented paragraph that says words not defined, or in the state building code, is that we don't have to, like, for example, I gave out examples like person. We have a definition of person in our existing bylaw. I don't think we need a definition of a person. I think there's a plain and ordinary and well understood meaning of what that is. In some of the specific articles, like the wind article and the solar article, there are trade terms that I think are generally understood. I don't think we need to define a wind turbine. I don't think we need to define a nacelle and things of that sort. And they agree. Again, they will get back to substance about each one when we get to it. But again, the idea here, the philosophy is to try to simplify it, get rid of what we don't need, put in definitions we do need, clarify definitions we need to clarify, which they had a number of places where they say clarify, and then go, and go from there. I just think we, again, have a laundry list of things in our definition articles that are just simply not necessary. And certainly in the later articles, the specialty ones like wind, solar, the harbor overlay, I don't think we need, there's terms in there I don't think we need to define, because I think they have a general understanding. And, my argument is that's a principle we apply in courts, and Judge Cutler pointed out, yes, to a point. That's just a philosophical approach. Are we going to have a laundry list of words defined, or are we going to just, plain and ordinary meaning and trade usage? Are we just going to accept what those are and not have to define every friggin' thing that comes along?
Okay, Tom.
So
What-
here's for the approach for tonight, I guess, is to say this is, do we want to go definition by definition, or do we want to just say, is there anything that jumps out that needs change, either elimination, rewrite, or addition of a definition we do not now have? And maybe we approach it start from there and then go into the micromanaging of each individual definition. If we're doing these definitions as a whole at the Springtown meeting, we don't have to focus on certain ones, but we all did agree in our discussion this afternoon that height, KP is well aware that height is a definition that this committee and its predecessor in the planning board discuss ad nauseum about changing. you know, I didn't hear any substantive disagreement, but they haven't substantively weighed in on each definition other than what notes you see here. So I'll leave it open to you guys right now. How do you want to approach this? Just, you know,
Okay.
broad brush of what you think needs to be changed, or go definition by definition.
Okay, Tom, we discussed this last night, and the select board specifically talked about the difference about common usage, very specific. And it was the feeling of the select board that we want to make sure that this is very specific, for the reason that we did not want something which a opposition lawyer or whomever could argue on the basis of uncertainty. What does this really mean? And so it was discussed, and the select board would prefer that the language be as specific as possible in order to remove uncertainty. And there was discussion about many people would not be able to easily understand very specific, and the select board, what the consensus was that the people who are really going to be working on this will be able to understand that. So we are doing everybody a favor to be very, very specific. So that's
Yeah,
what
well,
it was
and
discussed, and that was the consensus of the select
that's
board.
understood, and nothing that I don't think it is proposed here is
Okay,
is departing. I mean, there are some things like again, I'll use the definition of person. We do not have to define what a person is.
I'm just letting you know,
I
bringing
hear
you
you.
back from these things that were discussed. So you have that. What we'd like to do is, and has been the idea from the beginning, is to empower this commission, and you particularly, Tom, to take care of this. And KP is there to do some of the grunt work for you. So understand that, you know, you have our support, and we're looking to do that. So we don't want to get in the middle of this. We want to support you. That's why we set this committee up and specifically said, go for it. And we're
Yeah,
supporting
yeah.
you. So you're doing a good job. Go for
I appreciate that, and that's
Okay, good.
We
it.
needed
Go
to
back,
clear.
please.
I needed to clear the air with town council about that. We
That's
did
fine.
that. So let's get beyond all of that.
Good.
So, again, well, again, let me throw it out there. Do we, a general overall, I guess I do want to start. That'll probably be the easiest. Does anybody have any of our existing definitions that you think can go, needs to be changed? Or are there any definitions you think we need that we don't have right now and should add? Again, it requires you having read all of this and read all the definitions to know that, the answer, to be able to answer that. But I suppose, you know, if nobody has any specific comments, I can just give this discussion document to KP, and then KP, KP and I hash this out, or KP gives us our, more substantive comments and rewrites, and then we hash this out on another night. That's fine, but I'm okay with doing it that way if you'd like.
We would just as soon let them to do that heavy lifting kind of work and not have you and this committee have to do that. That's why we hired them.
All right, well, okay.
And you can obviously under your supervision, but.
All right, well, you know what? All right. Yeah, David, go ahead. Sorry.
I think the question is if AP looks at it regarding if there's any updated case law or anything regarding some of the definitions, to kind of scrub them out and take a look at them from that way. Because I mean, by looking at some of the definition changes or what they are, they're the basic things of what you've had in the past, and there's some minor things. I think it would be good to have them look at it from that point, and then if there was anything that either we didn't disagree with or whatever at that point, then we could take it up, or if there was a reason why legally they had to have it.
Yeah.
But I that would be the way to maybe go about it.
Well, I'm looking like, for example, the definition of apartment. You know, my version eliminates it because I include it within a broader definition of multifamily housing that we don't have in our existing bylaw, which very much ties to the proposed table of uses. We almost have to do the definitions in conjunction with Article 4 because they're so tied together. But KP, you know, in the diagnostic makes a suggestion. Number one, we do need a definition of multifamily, which we do not have. We have it in one of the specialty bylaws, but not as a general proposition. And then it also has to conform to the new housing choice legislation, which is only a year old. And there were a number of their comments in the diagnostic that talked about conforming definitions to either the housing choice legislation or other changes that are made to Chapter 40A. So they've already at least taken a first crack at that. They just haven't done the actual rewrite of the definition to make it conform, and that's their next step. So, you know, we could punt all of this to them right now, but you know, again, I attached, you know, a proposal for a redo of the table of uses because it's so tied in together to it. These definitions would be applied to the various uses that we have. You know, and then again, I want to eliminate, I want everything in Article 2 in one place. They want to keep some definitions in some of the specialty articles. They have to make that argument to us. And so maybe rather than go through this definition by definition, we just punt all this to KP right now.
It-
Hey,
it's
well,
not as-
what about the separation into different types of definitions?
I don't care about that anymore. I
Oh,
thought
okay.
that was user friendly, but if it is confusing to anyone, then
You know,
just go.
I've been
Then just
using the
go straight- yeah,
example
then
of
just go
Falmouth
straight up.
recently, and
Yeah.
they have a almost unreadable definition list of which section the definition it lives in, and then you go to the actual definition section, and it's crazy. It's very hard to read. So okay.
We're not, this isn't Falmouth's thing. We're not dealing with Falmouth.
No,
That
but
type,
we-
What? No, I'm just using it
typically
as
what we
an
have,
example of
that
one
type
that
of.
breaks them up and doesn't work.
All right, I'm fine with just going back to a straight alphabetical, and I can rewrite my proposal in straight
Good.
alphabetical, but I don't have a problem with that, but I did emphasize to KP the desire to consolidate definitions in one place and not have what Falmouth has and what we have. And again,
Yeah,
for
if I,
example, they might in a particular bylaw, let's say the wind bylaw, let's say any of those terms survive. I don't think any of them need to survive, but that's me. They would want a very specialized definition that applies to only one article to be in that article. Okay, make the argument for that, but I still don't see it, but that's fine. It's not, again, not going to the mat issue. So what I will do, I will take this discussion document and send it automatically off to KP without any notes, without any comments that I'll just say, we generally thought, just take this discussion document, tell us where you want to do rewrites. We'll do an organization of straight alphabetical, look at the new definitions, but if you're going to look at the new definitions I proposed, you have to look at the new table of uses, and we're going to have to discuss these together at some point.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
All right,
Again,
that's fine. That's fine. So-
What we specifically are looking for is absolutely, as much as you can, certainty as to what it actually means. And if it is a little bit over specific, that's okay, because we want to make sure that if there is litigation, we don't spend a lot of time litigating the meaning of things. We want it specifically, and that was basically why the select board did that. And also, it's important to understand that we specifically want KP Law to do a lot of the work, because it's a lot of work that Tom's been doing and everybody
Yeah,
else and David and right. And we want to take that burden off of you and pay for it to be done.
Well, you could always, nobody said you couldn't pay me, by the way. I'm not averse to the idea. So, but I did emphasize in this meeting that what I've always emphasized is that this needs to come from us, not from them. And we're working in a partnership, but I think they're confronted with an issue that they have a committee or at least an individual who is different when they confront in other towns, who, you know, is writing the bylaw too. And you know, again, we worked out our differences today, so I'm not
Okay, that's
worried about the
fine.
relation.
So
Let's just leave it at that. But
let's leave it at
I
that.
do think that, you know, still the crux of what, and they agree with this, that what this bylaw is going to contain has to come from us in the community. It's not them telling us what to do. It's only them telling us how to write.
We are asking, that's exactly right. We are asking you to make the editorial decisions. We are putting in their hands the practical implementation decisions, right? So
All right, so,
understand,
all right, so we'll leave it that I'm gonna send this off to them. For our meeting on November 30th, we'll do our, we will recap the meeting, the forum on the 7th, like we did this forum. We will do our final preparations for the forum in December. And then I will distribute discussion documents, jumping ahead, for Articles 3 and 4 with KP's diagnostic comments to each of them. And then how we deal with 2 and 4 together, we'll figure that out at some point in December with KP. We'll have substantive comments, we'll have substantive rewrites in them. The philosophy of Article 4 that I'm putting forward is simplicity. KP agrees that our current laundry list is too long, but we can't let simplicity defeat specificity where we need specificity. So
absolutely.
as you look at my proposal for Article 4, look at our existing Article 4, look at KP's diagnostic comments on Article 4, keep all of that in mind. You know, there's some sweet spot between what I propose and what we have today. We don't want to have people go to court to get a use allowed, and like that happened because of our list the way it is. So, and then once I think if we settle on the uses first, the definitions follow from that. So we may have to deal with 4 before we deal here with 2, but we can deal with it all in December and plan to deal with it in December. All right, then that makes this meeting a lot shorter than it was originally going to be, which is fine, I'm sure. Anything else that in preparation for a Springtown meeting outside of housekeeping and reorganization? As I said in our meeting today, KP brought up Article 8, the non-conforming article. Is there anything else that anybody on the committee feels needs to be addressed in the spring rather than wait to the fall? Of anything of substance? Anybody?
Is there anything project-wise that would, being on the planning board, that would need to be looked at, that could be percolating, that would happen before the time that would need to be done in the spring instead of the fall of 2023?
Well, anything that's already applied for is grandfathered, and anything that, you know, and you know, we discussed this frankly this afternoon too, is that, you know, the risk about this and the public process of it is that people get wind of what you're thinking about, and then they'll start filing applications to freeze the current zoning. And I mean, there's nothing we can do about it. So that'll happen. I don't, you know, we have something that's before us that is bringing up, and again, may provide a data point for comparisons of frontage the issues of how many houses should be served by common driveways and stuff like that. You know, the planning board over the last year has discussed regulations about the means by which people access residential properties. And we were borrowing a Plymouth bylaw, some stuff of our own, changing the limit, the amount of houses and the length of common driveways. The thinking is to, at least my thinking is to go put that back into a bylaw, not a regulation. And you know, that's what the KP's attention, they're well aware of it, and that's part of our definitions. And it's, you know, when we deal with the definition of common driveway, how are we going to define it? When we deal with the definition of the street and the way, how are we going to define it? You know, where the objectives of that regulation, and the Plymouth bylaw, by the way, just provided regulations for a road with something more than a common driveway, but not a subdivision control road. And we don't have regulations. We don't say what a non-subdivision road should be, minimum width and length and all that. The Plymouth bylaw provided that. And some of us thought that was a good idea. So KP's alerted to all these issues and we're going to bring these in. But, you know, there's nothing there that's like super pressing that I can foresee that somebody would beat anyway by making an application before it got to town meeting. So, you know, the definition of height is problematic and needs to be addressed as soon as possible. But if we're going to deal with the definition as a whole, we don't have to isolate it out. But I don't see anything else. But that's why I'm asking if there's anything else. You know, the table of area regulation.
It's
Mhm.
it's hard to think. It's hard to think of it in about 2 minutes. But I mean, is there any that we consider low hanging fruit that would make sense to go with first? Because I mean, one of the issues is if you go with the Article 8 with the non-conforming one, you know, that's going to be a pretty controversial one. And so, you know, if we go with it in the spring, that's fine to see if it goes up or down. But it would be good to get some things through that can easily be gotten through before
Well,
we have.
I think the reorganization parts, I think the definitions will go through and some of them may be substantive changes and there might be new definitions. And I think the table of uses, I don't think it's going to be super controversial because I think we all agree of simplifying it, but I don't think it'll be hugely controversial. I guess the philosophy behind the simplification is to not micromanage uses, that we are in terms of our commercial development where we're located, we want to keep 3A, the harbor and the village all vibrant. We're a beggar, not chooser community. We can't say, we have a broad definition of a retail use, but okay, you can't do this retail use, but you can do that retail use. I mean, there's some things we will prohibit that we've always prohibited: adult uses, marijuana, recreational sales, fast food. But I think otherwise my own thought is we take a turn toward just broader use categories and allow for some flexibility, which bringing back the use variance allows us to do as well. I don't think that'll be controversial, but other low-hanging fruit is if we made a change to the wind bylaw, to the solar bylaw, or to the or if we dealt with the parking bylaw or the sign bylaw. Those would be low-hanging fruit, but there's also not a lot of substantive change that anybody's brought up about any of those. I had a couple of little tweaks to the wind and solar one, but nothing earth-shattering.
Yeah.
The big changes we are going to deal with in substance will be Article 5, the table of area regulations, and you're right, Article 8 is going to be controversial. We probably need to do better research than we had last year about how many properties would be impacted. But Article 8 is where we are a true outlier in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and so we have to address whether we want to continue to be an outlier or go for it. And again, town council brought it up today as something we should address sooner rather than later. Yes, Jack, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Rather than yell, I thought I'd use a little tool to raise my hand. What
Yeah.
what innovation. Yeah, again, understand what the select board, what we're trying to do as we look ahead to the various town meetings in the next year or so. We're trying to get stuff done. So we're trying to get some of the regular organizational stuff, the bookkeeping stuff. We want to get that done. There are things that, in the opinion of town council, that need to get done, and also things that this committee thinks need to get done. And the strategy is to sprinkle those into the spring town meeting so we can get things done, and get a lot of the housekeeping matters and the consolidation done, and then leave room in there for things that this committee thinks are very important, and that the town council says you really kind of have to. So just so that to clarify.
All right, and last item of business, the minutes of October 13th meeting. Can I have a motion to approve those? If nobody has any changes or comments?
I'm sorry, I didn't review them, but they're usually
Well, they're-
very good.
They're perfect, Clark.
Oh,
Sorry,
Well,
you know,
can I-
that's a good part to know too.
Clark, you're not saying as an architect that you approve things that you haven't reviewed. Please don't tell me that.
Well, we've
I-
got an
I-
application. We've got an application. All right.
I make a
yeah, go
motion we
ahead,
approve
Dave.
the minutes for October 13th.
13th. Second, someone?
I'll second
Hi,
that.
Cassie.
Nobody else will.
Okay. All right, all in favor, roll call, alphabetical, Clark,
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan, aye.
Jack
Jack.
Creighton, aye.
David Farrar guy.
Cassie Malatesta, aye.
Okay, then that's approved, and then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Motion
moved.
adjourned.
Motion.
All right, roll call,
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan, aye.
Jack Creighton, aye.
David Farrar guy.
And Cassie,
Cassie Malatesta, aye.
unless you want to hang out more, but no, I appreciate.
Aye.
I appreciate your attention, Cassandra. Thank you very much. You've had a long day, and I appreciate everybody. So we'll see you at the forum on the 7th, and then our next meeting is November 30th. It's a while, correct?
Actually,
Oh, no,
there's
no,
a,
I'm sorry. Actually, November 9th, 2 nights
Yes.
after the forum. We will meet the 9th. That's right. The 9th and the 30th. All right,
Yes.
great. I'm sorry. All right, thank you.
Good night.
all right,
night.
good night all.
Good night, all.